The crystal chandeliers of the Blue Moonlight restaurant cast prismatic shadows across white tablecloths as Park Jun-seok sat in his usual corner booth, his tailored black suit sharp enough to cut glass. The private dining room hummed with the controlled tension of powerful men discussing dangerous business. Across from him, 3 executives from a rival syndicate smiled with teeth that promised betrayal. The merger discussion was a formality, a dance of dominance wrapped in the language of legitimate enterprise. Everything his family had built over 3 decades balanced on the edge of this conversation. Jun-seok nodded at something about territory distribution, his expression carved from ice. His reputation as the Ice King wasn't just about ruthlessness. It was about control, the ability to sit among vipers and never flinch, never show weakness. Outside these walls he commanded fear. Inside he was simply doing what survival demanded. Then he saw her. Liara moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her simple black uniform and white apron marking her as invisible to men like those seated around him. She balanced a tray of imported wine with steady hands, her mind clearly elsewhere. Jun-seok had seen her here before, always polite, always professional, always exhausted around the eyes in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible choices. She was part of the background, the kind of person his world was built on but never acknowledged. She approached their table, setting down glasses with quiet precision. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness around dangerous men, but from the bone-deep weariness of someone working a 3rd shift. He caught a glimpse of her face as she poured, saw the calculations running behind her eyes. Medical bills, he guessed. Rent. The mathematics of survival that people like him never had to solve. That's when everything changed. Ara's hand froze mid-pour, her gaze fixed on something beyond the window. Then her eyes dropped to Jun-seok's chest, and the color drained from her face like water from a shattered glass. Time crystallized into a single, impossible moment. A tiny point of red light danced across the crisp white of his shirt, steady and patient as death itself, a ruby bead that meant a sniper was looking at his heart through a scope from somewhere in the Seoul darkness. Their eyes met. The Ice King saw his own mortality reflected in a waitress's terrified expression. The waitress saw a human being 1 heartbeat away from becoming a corpse. In that frozen second, Liara made a choice that would shatter both their worlds. She screamed his name, a sound raw with pure instinct, and launched herself across the table. The wine tray exploded in a cascade of crystal and Bordeaux. Her body collided with his just as the window detonated inward, glass fragmenting into 1,000 glittering knives. The bullet that should have punched through Jun-seok's chest buried itself in the leather booth where his head had been a fraction of a second before. They hit the floor hard, Ara's weight pinning him down, her hand pressed against his chest as if she could physically hold his heart inside his body. Around them chaos erupted, men diving for cover, guards rushing in with weapons drawn, alarms splitting the air. But all Jun-seok could process was the impossible reality of what had just happened. A waitress, a woman with nothing, a complete stranger who should have run, who should have saved herself, had instead thrown her body between a Mafia boss and a bullet. Ara lifted her head, her face inches from his, both of them breathing hard. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead where flying glass had caught her. Her eyes were wide with the realization of what she'd just done, and to whom. "Are you insane?" Jun-seok's voice came out harsh, defensive, because he genuinely didn't understand the instinct that had made her move. In his world, people didn't sacrifice themselves for strangers. They didn't risk everything for someone who could give them nothing in return. I saw the light," she whispered, still sprawled across him, her uniform soaked in wine that looked too much like blood. "I couldn't just, you would have died." His guards surrounded them now, weapons trained on every window, every shadow. Orders barked in rapid Korean. The rival executives had vanished like smoke, their betrayal now written in gunpowder and broken glass. But Jun-seok couldn't look away from the woman trembling on top of him, this nobody who had just saved the life of Seoul's most dangerous man. "Get her up," he commanded, his voice returning to its usual ice. "Take her to the back. No one leaves this building until I say so." As his men pulled Ara to her feet, Jun-seok saw the exact moment she understood her mistake. Saving his life hadn't freed her, it had chained her to him, because in his world witnesses didn't walk away, and the sniper who'd missed once would be looking for loose ends to tie up. Liara had stepped out of the shadows, and into a war she couldn't begin to understand. And Park Jun-seok, the man who'd spent his entire life trusting no one, now owed his life to the one person in that room with absolutely nothing to gain from his survival. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you love intense mafia romance with unlikely heroes and dangerous redemption, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Mafia Moonlight Tales, and drop a comment telling me, would you have saved him or run? Hit that share button to spread these tales of love in the underworld. Now, let's see what happens when the Ice King tries to figure out why a waitress would die for a monster. The back office of the Blue Moonlight smelled like gun oil and expensive cologne, a combination that made Ara's stomach turn. Two of Junseok's guards flanked her, their faces expressionless masks, their hands never far from the weapons holstered beneath their jackets. She sat in a metal folding chair that seemed designed to make her feel small, powerless. It was working. Through the closed door, she could hear the controlled chaos of the restaurant being locked down, staff being questioned, exits being sealed, security footage being reviewed. The reality of what she'd done was settling into her bones like winter cold. She'd saved a man's life, and now she was being treated like a criminal. The door opened with enough force to make her flinch. Junseok entered, his suit jacket discarded, his white shirt marked with wine stains that looked like abstract wounds. He'd washed the blood from a minor glass cut on his jaw, but the mark remained, a thin red line that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. Behind him came another man older, with silver threading through his hair and eyes that calculated her worth in seconds. Name, the older man said, pulling out a tablet. His voice was flat, bureaucratic, as if interrogating witnesses to assassination attempts was merely another item on his evening agenda. Lee Ara, her voice came out steadier than she felt. How long have you worked here? 8 months. Who hired you? Junseok's voice cut in, sharp as broken glass. He leaned against the desk, arms crossed, studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. Who told you I'd be here tonight? The accusation hit her like a slap. No one hired me, I work here. I applied through the normal process, Manager Kim interviewed me. Convenient. He pushed off the desk, circling her chair like a predator. A struggling waitress just happens to be serving my table, just happens to notice a laser sight before trained security does, just happens to have the reflexes to act. Ara twisted to follow his movement, anger starting to burn through her fear. I noticed because I was looking at you. I noticed because that red dot didn't belong on your chest, and I acted because... She stopped, swallowing hard, because a human being was about to die right in front of me. But saying that to a man like Park Junseok felt like speaking a foreign language he'd never learned. Because why? He stopped directly in front of her, leaning down until they were eye level. This close, she could see the calculation behind his cold exterior, the survival instinct that questioned everything, trusted nothing. What did you hope to gain? Nothing, the word came out bitter. I hope to gain nothing. I have a shift at another restaurant in 4 hours. I have rent due in 3 days. I have a mother in the hospital who needs medication I can't afford. The last thing I needed was to throw myself in front of a bullet for a man who... She bit off the rest of the sentence, but they both heard it anyway. For a man who probably deserves it. Silence filled the room like smoke. The older man exchanged a glance with Junseok, something passing between them that Ara couldn't read. Junseok straightened. His expression unreadable. Check her story, every detail. Employment records, hospital records, financials. I want to know what she had for breakfast 3 months ago. He moved toward the door, then paused. And keep her here. The sniper saw her face. If she's innocent. He didn't finish the sentence, but Ara heard the unspoken ending clearly. If she's innocent, she's already dead. 3 hours later, Ara found herself in the back of a black Mercedes with windows tinted dark enough to hide crimes. Junseok sat across from her in the spacious interior, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Korean too low for her to catch. The older man, whose name she'd learned was Director Han, had spent 2 hours pulling apart her life like a thread until he'd found exactly what she told them. Nothing. No criminal record, no suspicious connections, no hidden agendas. Just a woman working 3 jobs to keep her mother breathing. The car glided through Seoul's nighttime streets, moving away from the neighborhoods she knew toward the kind of addresses that existed only in magazines. Ara's hands twisted in her lap, still wearing her wine-stained uniform, still feeling the phantom weight of Junseok's body beneath hers when she tackled him to the floor. Where are you taking me? She finally found her voice as they entered a part of the city where buildings pierced the sky like glass daggers. Junseok ended his call, his dark eyes settling on her with that same unsettling intensity. Somewhere safe. I need to go home. My mother's nurse will be expecting me to call. Your mother has been moved to a private room at Seoul National Hospital. The nurse has been informed you're dealing with a family emergency. He said it matter-of-factly, as if rearranging her entire life required no more effort than ordering dinner. Ara's blood went cold then hot. You had no right. I had every right. His voice dropped to something dangerous. The moment you put yourself between me and that bullet, you became my responsibility. The sniper missed. That means they'll try again, and now you're a witness. Do you understand what that means? She did. She'd seen enough crime dramas, heard enough whispered stories about the underworld. Witnesses disappeared. So what am I now? A prisoner? A guest. The word tasted like a lie even as he said it. In protective custody. The Mercedes pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that seemed to touch the clouds. They rode an elevator that required a fingerprint scan, ascending in silence that felt heavier than stone. When the doors opened, they opened directly into a penthouse that stole Ara's breath despite her anger. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Han River, the city spread out like scattered diamonds below. The space was all clean lines and expensive minimalism, the kind of home that felt more like a museum than a place where people actually lived. Everything was white, black, or chrome. Cold, beautiful, utterly empty of warmth. There are 3 guest rooms, Junseok said, moving to pour himself a drink from a crystal decanter. Choose one. Director Han will bring clothes and anything else you need tomorrow. Ara stood frozen in the entrance, her cheap shoes leaving marks on marble that probably cost more than her yearly salary. For how long? He took a slow sip of whiskey, his back to her as he stared out at his kingdom of lights. Until I find who wants me dead, and make sure they understand that touching you would be the last mistake they ever make. The protection in his words should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a sentence. She'd saved a man's life, and her reward was a golden cage suspended in the sky, guarded by a monster who just claimed ownership of her survival. I can't afford to miss work, she said quietly, hatting how small her voice sounded in this cavernous space. Junseok finally turned, and something flickered behind his ice, not warmth exactly but recognition. You won't need to work, not while you're here. And that, Ara realized, was the problem. He could solve her financial crisis with pocket change. He could protect her with an army. He could control every aspect of her existence without breaking a sweat. But the one thing he couldn't do was understand why that made her feel more trapped than safe. Ara didn't sleep. She spent the night in a guest room larger than her entire apartment, staring at the ceiling and calculating how many shifts she was missing, how many bills were piling up, how many calls from creditors her mother's nurse would field. By the time dawn broke over the Han River, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and pink, she'd made her decision. She found Junseok in the kitchen, if the marble and steel workspace could be called something so domestic. He stood at the espresso machine in perfectly pressed slacks and a white dress shirt, no tie yet, looking like he'd already been awake for hours. The morning light made him seem almost human. I need to go to work, Ara announced, still wearing the borrowed silk pajamas that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He didn't look up from the coffee he was preparing. No. That wasn't a request. Now his eyes lifted, dark and measuring. It wasn't a negotiation either. Ara crossed her arms, planting herself in the doorway like she could physically block his authority. My mother is in the hospital. The bills don't stop because you've decided to play protector. I have 2 other jobs besides the restaurant, and if I don't show up, I'll lose them. The hospital bills are being handled. He poured coffee into a cup so delicate it looked like it would shatter if you breathed on it too hard. By you, her voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. I don't want your money, I want to earn what I owe. You saved my life, you don't owe anything. That's exactly why I do. She stepped into the kitchen, her bare feet cold on the pristine floor. You think paying my bills makes us even. It makes me bought. It makes me owned. I didn't risk my life so you could turn me into some kind of charity case locked in your tower. Something flickered across Junseok's face, too fast to read. He set down the coffee cup with deliberate precision. You don't understand the situation. The man who tried to kill me won't stop because his first attempt failed. He'll be looking for weaknesses, leverage. You became both the moment you interfered. Then let me disappear. Give me money for a bus ticket and I'll vanish. And he'll find you in 48 hours. Junseok moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. Do you know what happens to witnesses in my world? They don't get buried in paperwork and red tape. They get buried in unmarked grave. Ara held her ground even as her heart hammered against her ribs. So what am I supposed to do? Live in your penthouse forever? Watch my whole life disappear while you hunt for someone who might never stop coming? The question hung between them, and for the first time since the bullet shattered that window, Junseok seemed uncertain. He studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve, this woman who'd rather face danger than accept his protection without conditions. What do you want? He finally asked, and the question sounded genuine. I want my life back. I want to work. I want to pay my own debts. She met his gaze without flinching. And I want to stop feeling like saving you was the biggest mistake I ever made. The words landed like a physical blow. Junseok's jaw tightened, something wounded flickering behind the ice before his mask slammed back into place. He turned away, staring out at the city he ruled from this glass tower. You'll work from here, he said finally, his voice controlled again. Whatever jobs you can do remotely, Director Han will arrange it, and you'll have a security detail, non-negotiable. It wasn't freedom, but it was a crack in the cage. Ara recognized a victory, however small, when she saw one. Fine, she said, but I pay for my mother's care, out of what I earn, even if it takes years. Junseok's reflection in the window showed something that might have been respect, or maybe just exhaustion. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. And you're the most controlling man I've ever saved. She turned to leave, then paused. The coffee's burning, by the way. Behind her she heard him curse softly in Korean, and despite everything the corner of her mouth lifted. The Ice King could be rattled, that was worth knowing. For 3 days Ara settled into a strange routine. She worked remotely from the penthouse, translating documents for one job, doing data entry for another, her laptop perched on the obscenely expensive dining table. Junseok disappeared each morning in tailored suits, returning late smelling of cigarette smoke and danger. They orbited each other like planets on different trajectories, close enough to feel the gravitational pull, but never quite colliding. Until the hospital called. Ara answered her phone in the middle of formatting a spreadsheet, expecting the usual update on her mother's condition. Instead, the billing department informed her cheerfully that the account had been paid in full, all 73 million won, cleared, closed, she could stop worrying now. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the marble table. Her vision tunneled, blood rushing in her ears. 73 million won, 3 years of debt, erased with a phone call she hadn't made. She found Junseok in his home office, seated behind a desk made of dark wood and cold authority. He looked up as she entered without knocking, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his pen. You paid it. Her voice came out strangled, caught between fury and something that felt dangerously close to grief. After everything I said, after I told you exactly what it would mean, you paid it anyway. He stood slowly, cautious. Ara. Don't, she held up a hand, trembling with rage. Don't you dare act like this was a kindness. I told you I needed to pay it myself. I told you it mattered. Your mother needed treatment she wasn't receiving because of cost concerns. The doctors were holding back. So you decided I couldn't handle it. The words erupted from somewhere deep, a wound she hadn't known she carried. You decided that my pride, my agency, my right to take care of my own family meant less than your ability to solve problems with money. Junseok moved around the desk, his expression shifting from defensive to something harder. I decided that watching you break yourself for a debt you'd never escape was pointless suffering. I have resources. Why should you destroy yourself when I can end it with a signature? Because it wasn't yours to end, her voice cracked. Everything in my life is mine, Junseok. My struggles, my victories, my failures, they belong to me, and you just took that away like it meant nothing. It meant everything. The words came out quiet, almost lost. You saved my life. You think I don't understand what that cost you? You threw away your safety, your anonymity, your peace for a man you didn't know. Let me give you something back. I don't want anything back. Ara's hands fisted at her sides. That's what you don't understand. I didn't save you for a reward. I didn't do it so you'd feel obligated to fix my life. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and now you've turned it into a transaction. Silence crashed between them like broken glass. Junseok stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something raw beneath the ice. Confusion, frustration. And underneath it all, genuine hurt that he was trying to help and somehow making everything worse. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally, the admission costing him. "Everyone in my life wants something. Everyone has an angle. You're the first person who—" He stopped, jaw working. "I thought solving your problems would make you hate me less." "I don't hate you." Ara's anger deflated into exhaustion. "But I need you to see me as a person, not a problem to solve. I need you to respect that some battles are mine to fight, even if I lose them." He nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of it. The payment is reversible. I can undo it. Let you set up your own payment plan." It was an olive branch, an acknowledgement. Ara felt the tightness in her chest ease slightly. "Do that, please." "On one condition." His eyes met hers. "Let me help, not by throwing money at everything, but by being here. If you need something, ask. Let me earn the right to care what happens to you." The vulnerability in those words stole her breath. This was the man beneath the Ice King, uncertain and reaching for something he'd never learned to hold. And despite everything, Ara found herself wanting to teach him. The attack came on a Tuesday, during what should have been a routine visit to the hospital. Ara had insisted on seeing her mother in person, and after their confrontation about the bills, Junseok hadn't argued. He'd simply assigned 4 guards and taken the seat beside her in the armored Mercedes. They were 3 blocks from Seoul National Hospital when the first bullet punched through the windshield. The driver's head snapped back, blood spraying across the dashboard. The car swerved violently, jumping the curb as the second and third shots shattered the remaining windows. Ara screamed as Junseok threw himself across her, his weight crushing her into the leather seat. She felt the impact of a bullet hitting his shoulder, felt him grunt in pain but refused to move. "Out now," he roared at the guards. The Mercedes crashed into a storefront, metal shrieking. Someone was firing from above, from multiple positions. This wasn't a single sniper. This was an execution squad. Junseok hauled Ara from the wreckage, his left arm hanging useless, blood soaking through his jacket. Around them his guards returned fire, creating a corridor of chaos. Civilians scattered, screaming. Glass exploded. The city turned into a war zone in heartbeats. "Run," Junseok gasped, pushing her forward. But Ara saw what he couldn't, the second team moving in from the east, cutting off their escape route. Director Han was down, 2 guards were dead. They were being herded like prey. She grabbed Junseok's good arm and yanked him in the opposite direction, away from the hospital, away from the luxury districts he knew. "This way, trust me." They ran. Ara led them through streets that didn't appear on tourist maps, alleys she'd walked 1,000 times when bus fare was a luxury she couldn't afford. Behind them gunfire crackled. Shouts in Korean echoed off narrow walls. Junseok was slowing, his breathing ragged, blood leaving a trail any competent hunter could follow. She pulled him into a side passage barely wide enough for their shoulders, then down a set of crumbling stairs into a sub-basement she'd once used to avoid loan sharks. The darkness was absolute, thick with the smell of mold and forgotten things. Above them, footsteps pounded past. Junseok collapsed against the wall, sliding down, his face grey in the dim light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. Blood pooled beneath him, too much blood. Ara's hands shook as she pressed them against his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding with pressure she'd learned from late-night medical dramas. "Where are we?" he managed, his voice tight with pain. "Yongsan slums, the part your city planners pretend doesn't exist." She stripped off her jacket, wadding it against his wound. "I lived 2 blocks from here before I got the restaurant job. Nobody asks questions here, nobody looks too close." He stared at her through the darkness, this woman who knew how to disappear in a city he thought he owned. Smart. "Stubborn," she corrected, echoing his words from days ago. Her fingers found his pulse, too fast but steady. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," he tried to smile, failed. "The bullet's still in there, I need a doctor." "A doctor will report a gunshot wound, that's a death sentence right now." Ara's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last, then she remembered. "There's a woman, Mrs. Kang. She used to be a military nurse before she lost her license. She might." "Do it." Junseok's eyes were starting to unfocus. "But Ara, if I don't make it?" "You'll make it." She pressed harder against his wound, feeling his blood hot and sticky between her fingers. "You don't get to die in a basement after I've dragged you through half of Seoul. That's not how this story ends." His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "Bossy. You have no idea." She held his gaze, willing him to stay conscious, stay alive. Now shut up and let me save you again. I'm getting really good at it. Mrs. Kang's apartment smelled like tiger balm and decades of cigarette smoke. The old woman had asked no questions when Ara appeared at her door with a bleeding man, just pointed them to a back room and started boiling water. 2 hours and a bottle of soju later, the bullet was out, the wound was stitched, and Junseok was sleeping off the pain and alcohol on a mattress that had seen better decades. Ara sat beside him in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the slum around them. Shouting from next door, a baby crying 3 floors up, traffic from the street, the real Seoul that tourists never saw. Her hand rested near his, not quite touching, monitoring the rise and fall of his chest. He woke near dawn, eyes finding her immediately in the grey light. You stayed. Someone had to make sure you didn't die out of spite. She offered him water from a cracked mug. How do you feel? Like I've been shot. He struggled to sit up, wincing. His expensive shirt was gone, replaced by a threadbare t-shirt Mrs. Kang had found. Without his armor of tailored suits, he looked younger. Human. Thank you for getting us out. Ara shrugged, uncomfortable with his gratitude. You took a bullet for me, we're even. We'll never be even. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to unpack. He looked around the cramped room at the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling. You lived like this. Worse, actually. This place has running water most days. She pulled her knees to her chest. Don't look at me like that, I survived. That's more than a lot of people can say. Junseok was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost. I had a room like this once, before my father decided I was old enough to be useful. Ara turned to him, surprised. He never talked about his past, never showed cracks in the Ice King facade. But here, stripped of his power and bleeding in a slum apartment, maybe the mask was too heavy to hold. I was 7 when he brought me to my first meeting, Junseok continued, staring at his bandaged shoulder. Told me to sit still and watch. Learn. There was a man who'd stolen from us, small amount, maybe the price of Mrs. Kang's rent for a year. My father had him killed in front of everyone, as a lesson. He swallowed hard. As my lesson. God, Ara's hand moved without thinking, covering his. He asked me afterward if I understood. I said yes because I was terrified. But I didn't, not really. I understood later when I realized I'd never be allowed to leave, that I'd been born into this life and the only way out was in a box. His fingers tightened around hers. I learned to be cold because warmth was a liability. I learned to trust no one because everyone wanted something. I learned to see people as tools because that's what I'd been turned into. You're not a tool, Ara said quietly. No, he finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes had nothing to do with the bullet wound. Then what am I? A man who spent his entire life hurting people because it was expected, a monster playing at being human. She thought about the man who'd taken a bullet for her, who tried to fix her problems even when he didn't understand why it hurt, who was learning to ask instead of demand. You're a man who had his childhood stolen, who was taught the wrong lessons and is trying to unlearn them. She squeezed his hand. You're someone who's still capable of change. You see good in me that doesn't exist. I see a man who keeps saving me even when it costs him everything. Ara's thumb traced circles on his palm, an unconscious gesture of comfort. I see someone who's still fighting to be better than what they made you. Junseok closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were glassy with unshed tears he'd probably never learned to cry. You make me want to be that man. That terrifies me. Good, she whispered. Being terrified means you're still alive. They stayed in the slums for 3 days, while Junseok healed and his remaining men regrouped. Director Han had survived with a cracked rib and a vendetta. He arrived at Mrs. Kang's apartment on the 4th morning with news that made Junseok's blood run cold. We found the leak, Han said, his weathered face grim. Choi Sang-hoon, your lieutenant. Junseok felt the floor drop beneath him. Sang-hoon, the man who'd stood beside him for 8 years, the man he'd trusted with his life, his secrets, his vulnerabilities. You're certain. Bank transfers, encrypted communications with the Kim syndicate. He's been planning this coup for months. Han's jaw clenched. The restaurant, the convoy ambush, all him. He's been feeding them your location, your schedule, everything. Ara watched Junseok's expression shut down, the ice returning to protect what was left of him. Another betrayal. Another person using him as a stepping stone. She reached for his hand, but he pulled away, standing to stare out the grimy window. Where is he now? Unknown, he disappeared after the convoy attack, probably assumed you were dead. Han hesitated. Boss, there's more, he's put a price on the girl, $500 million for anyone who delivers her alive. The words hung in the air like poison. Ara's stomach twisted. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was currency in a war she didn't understand. We need to move, Junseok said, his voice flat. Get her somewhere secure while I handle Sang-hoon. No, Ara stood, anger flaring. Don't do that, don't shut me out because you're hurt. This isn't about my feelings, this is about keeping you alive. He finally looked at her and his eyes were empty. I should have killed him years ago. I saw the ambition, the hunger. I ignored it because I wanted to believe someone could be loyal. Before Ara could respond, Mrs. Kang's door exploded inward. 4 men in black tactical gear flooded the apartment, weapons drawn. Ara screamed as hands grabbed her, as Han went for his gun and was clubbed to the ground. Junseok lunged forward despite his injured shoulder, taking down one attacker before a taser dropped him to his knees. Don't hurt him, Ara fought against the arms dragging her backward. Please don't. The last thing she saw was Junseok struggling to rise, blood seeping through his bandage, her name on his lips. Then a bag went over her head and the world went black. She woke in a chair, hands zip-tied behind her back, the hood yanked away. The room was industrial, all concrete and shadows. A single light hung overhead, casting harsh angles across the man standing before her. Choi Sang-hoon was younger than she expected, handsome in the way predators are handsome. His suit was expensive, his smile sharp. Miss Lee, finally we meet properly. He pulled up a chair, sitting backward on it, arms crossed over the back. I apologize for the rough treatment, my men can be enthusiastic. Where's Junseok? So it's Junseok now, not Mr. Park or the boss. Sang-hoon's smile widened. I thought so. The Ice King finally found someone to melt for, how poetic. What do you want? Simple, Junseok's empire. He pulled out a phone, showing her a video feed. Junseok sat in what looked like the back of a van, hands cuffed, director Han unconscious beside him. He's on his way here now. He'll arrive, see you in danger, and he'll do what men in love always do, something stupid. Ara's heart hammered. He won't give up everything for me. Won't he? Sang-hoon leaned closer, his voice dropping to something cruel. That's the difference between him and me. He still believes in things like honor and loyalty. I believe in power. And power goes to whoever's willing to sacrifice anything to take it. He stood, checking his watch. He has 30 minutes to arrive and sign over control of the syndicate. If he refuses, I'll make sure you understand exactly what kind of man he's protecting. Alone in the cold warehouse, Ara pulled against her restraints until her wrists bled, her mind racing for any way out. She'd saved Junseok twice. Now she needed to save him from himself. Junseok arrived with 15 minutes to spare, walking into the warehouse alone as instructed. No guards, no weapons visible, just a man in a blood-stained shirt, his left arm still bandaged, moving with the careful precision of someone who knew he was walking into his own execution. Ara's breath caught when she saw him. He looked at her first, his eyes scanning for injuries, and the relief that flooded his face when he found her relatively unharmed was almost painful to witness. Then his gaze shifted to Sang-hoon, and the Ice King returned. Let her go. Sang-hoon laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Still giving orders, you're in no position, Hyung. The honorific was mocking, a reminder of the brotherhood Sang-hoon had pretended to honor. But I'm a reasonable man. Sign the documents transferring control of all Park family assets, operations and territories to me. Then the girl walks. And me. You, Sang-hoon shrugged. You disappear, leave Seoul, leave Korea. Live out your days knowing you traded your throne for a waitress who saved you on a whim. Junseok moved toward the table where papers and a pen waited, his expression unreadable. Ara saw what Sang-hoon couldn't, the slight tilt of his head, the way his right hand hung loose at his side. He was calculating, planning. Don't do it, Ara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He'll kill us both the moment you sign. She's smarter than you gave her credit for, Sang-hoon admitted, pulling out a gun. But it doesn't matter, you're going to sign anyway because you've gone soft. The old Junseok would have let her die, would have called it acceptable losses. The old Junseok. Junseok said quietly, picking up the pen, was surviving, not living. He looked at Ara and something passed between them that needed no words. She taught me the difference. He signed. The sound of pen on paper was deafening in the silence. Sang-hoon moved forward to check the documents, greed making him careless. It was the opening Jun-seok had been waiting for. Everything happened in seconds. Jun-seok's right hand snapped up, a concealed knife flashing in the harsh light. He drove it into Sang-hoon's gun hand, the weapon clattering away. They collided, two men who'd once been brothers now trying to kill each other with desperate efficiency. Jun-seok's injured shoulder screamed in protest, but he fought through it, years of training overriding pain. Sang-hoon was younger, healthier, and had the advantage. He got Jun-seok against a concrete pillar, hands around his throat, squeezing. "You could have lived," he hissed. "You chose wrong." Ara screamed, throwing herself sideways in the chair, crashing into Sang-hoon's legs. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jun-seok broke free, gasping, and grabbed the fallen gun. The warehouse doors exploded open. Police tactical units flooded in, red dots from laser sights painting the scene. "Drop the weapon, hands where we can see them." Sang-hoon froze, his face contorting with rage and disbelief. "What did you do?" "He did what I told him." Director Han emerged from behind the police lines, his face bruised but triumphant. He held up a phone showing an active call. "Every word recorded, every confession documented. Your coup just became evidence." Jun-seok lowered the gun slowly, hands raised. He looked at Ara, still zip-tied to the chair, and something in his expression was achingly vulnerable. "I called them before I came in, made a deal. Full cooperation, full testimony about the syndicate's operations. In exchange for immunity and witness protection," the lead detective finished, moving forward to cut Ara's restraints. "Park Jun-seok is officially dead as of tonight. The empire falls. Everyone who worked for him gets prosecuted." Sang-hoon spat at Jun-seok's feet as officers cuffed him. "You destroyed everything for her." Jun-seok moved to Ara, helping her stand, his hands gentle despite the violence still echoing in the space. "No, I finally saved something that mattered." As they walked out of the warehouse together, Ara realized he'd done it. He'd chosen her life over his throne, humanity over power. The Ice King had melted, and what remained was simply a man willing to burn his entire world down for a chance at something real. 6 months later, autumn painted Seoul in shades of gold and amber. The cafe sat on a quiet street in Seongbuk-dong, the kind of neighborhood where retirees walked their dogs and young mothers pushed strollers without looking over their shoulders. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, "Morning Light Cafe." Jun-seok stood outside for a moment, his hands in the pockets of a simple jacket, no tailored suit in sight. His hair was longer now, less severe. He'd grown accustomed to anonymity, to being just another face in the crowd. Kim Min-ho, his new identification said, an office worker, unremarkable, alive. The bell chimed as he entered. The cafe was small, maybe 10 tables, with mismatched chairs and walls painted the color of warm cream. Sunlight streamed through clean windows. The smell of fresh coffee and baking bread wrapped around him like a welcome. Ara stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing jeans and a simple apron embroidered with a rising sun. She was laughing at something a regular customer said, her whole face lit up with genuine joy. Jun-seok's chest tightened at the sight. This was what freedom looked like on her, unguarded happiness, the weight of debt and danger finally lifted. She looked up and saw him. For a heartbeat, time stopped the way it had that night in the Blue Moonlight restaurant, but this time there was no red laser dot, no danger, just recognition and something that made her eyes shine. "Be right with you," she called, finishing with her customer. The regular left with a wave, and suddenly they were alone in the small space, 6 months of separation and new lives between them. Jun-seok sat at a corner table, the one with the best view of the door. Old habits died hard. Ara approached with a menu, her smile soft and knowing. "Welcome to Morning Light, first time here." He played along, accepting the menu. "Someone told me this place has the best coffee in Seoul." "Did they?" She pulled out a notepad, but her hand trembled slightly. "And what did this someone tell you about the owner?" "That she's the most stubborn, brave, impossibly kind person they've ever met." His voice dropped lower. "That she saved their life in more ways than one." Ara's professional facade cracked. She set down the notepad, sliding into the seat across from him. Up close he could see she'd changed too. The shadows under her eyes were gone. She wore a delicate silver bracelet and he recognized it, something he'd bought months ago before everything burned down, hidden in her belongings for her to find later. "You're late," she said quietly. "You said 6 months, it's been 6 months and 4 days." I wanted to be sure that it was really over, that no one would come looking. He reached across the table, and she met him halfway, their fingers intertwining like it was the most natural thing in the world. How's your mother? Thriving, the new treatment worked. She's been asking about you. Ara's thumb traced circles on his palm. I told her you were traveling, she doesn't need to know the rest. And you, he studied her face, memorizing the changes. Are you happy? She looked around her cafe at the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. The insurance money from his estate had been delivered anonymously enough to start over properly. I'm getting there, but something's been missing. Her eyes found his again. Someone, actually. I don't come with a throne anymore. No penthouse, no empire, just a man trying to figure out who he is without the ice. Good, she squeezed his hand. I never wanted the king. I wanted the man who kept choosing to be better, the one who learned that some battles are worth losing if you win the right things. Junseok felt something in his chest unknot, a tension he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it wasn't permanent. So what's good here? Ara stood, pulling him up with her. Everything, but you'll have to trust me. I do, he said, and meant it completely. I always have. She led him behind the counter into her new world, and as she poured his coffee, he realized this was what redemption looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but small moments in humble places. A cafe instead of a penthouse, morning light instead of shadows, and a woman who'd seen the worst of him and still chose to save him, over and over, until he finally learned to save himself. There was no laser on his chest, only her hand resting over his heart as she set down his cup, feeling it beat steady and free. Welcome home, Ara whispered. And for the first time in his life, Junseok understood what that word really meant.